what we're pointing to is that to get to some kind of contentment doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have an easy time. Just because things suck and you feel bad about yourself doesn't mean that in the future things aren't going to also be tough. It just means that you're not going to live in that dark place or that
Right.
kind of lost space where, you're rudderless or you just feel like it's hopeless. I'm Andrew Camendo, and this is Community of Mind, the show where I talk candidly with guests about their experiences with depression and anxiety. My goal with this show is to reduce the stigma associated with depression, try and show people that depression and anxiety are common and often looks very different and afflicts people in a way that you might not expect. My hope is that through this, we can start to build a community that improves the conversation around mental illness. On this first episode, I speak to a dear friend of mine, Paul, who is an accomplished law enforcement agent with the FBI and Marine officer. If you'd like to share your story or feedback, anonymously or not, please email me at communityofmind@gmail.com. Now please enjoy. What's your job and kind of what are you doing with your time?
So I'll start with the Marine side of the house. Been a reservist now for almost 10 years. I spent about 11 years, a little over 11 years on active duty between a mobilization and my normal active duty time. And yeah, I mean it's definitely a great privilege to have been promoted to lieutenant colonel. I think I just got a little. It was luck and timing, as I like to say, and a little bit of hard work. So very fortunate in that regard. And then I started with the FBI. I don't know, about 13, 14 years ago now, and I've been predominantly focused on counterterrorism work, extraterritorial in nature, meaning all outside the continental United States. Investigations into threats against Americans, crimes against Americans, terrorist actions against Americans, that kind of thing. As such, I do a lot of basically interagency work. Have done a lot of interagency work, and now I'm just focused on these coordinating operations between government agencies.
When you
Basically,
say
probably the
interagency,
best.
that's like working with the Department of Defense, working with the
Yeah,
NSA,
cross
all
it
these
runs the gamut.
different
Yeah,
groups like that, right?
yeah, it runs the gamut. It's all three letters.
Hmm.
Anything you can imagine, from law enforcement to intelligence to military, it's across the gamut.
And so
Um,
you're a leader in this, right? I mean, you promoted up to a high GS position, and how
well,
many
I
people do
did.
you manage, or do you work
Well,
with?
I really was more of a program manager. I was brought to headquarters specifically to facilitate integration between the FBI and the Defense Department, specifically as it pertains to our representatives, our liaison officers. That's basically what I've been up to.
Back to the Marine side of things, like what percentage of Marines make Lieutenant Colonel? It's a tiny force. Marines have, what is it, like 100,000 or 300,000 people or something like that. It's a tiny force, so I would imagine that it's really excessively hard to, make higher rank. And so I've got to imagine that even in the reserves, the rate of promotion on that is, less than 1% or something like that.
It is. It's definitely challenging once you hit the major rank, making the next step up into the lieutenant colonel rank, because then you're obviously in striking distance for O6 for colonel, and then theoretically general after that.
Right.
It's a very steep pyramid.
Sure.
It really starts to get steep at the lieutenant colonel rank, certainly in the reserves.
Part of why I'm talking through this is because I think from the outside, I think most people would say, well, hey, it doesn't get much more, successful than lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps Reserves, high ranking FBI agent doing cool stuff, right? That's in theory, defending the nation all over. And so I think generally speaking, if you're a teenager or you're in college or maybe you're, doing a hump job at a desk somewhere and you think, oh man, what an exciting life. I hate this, you know, credit processing job I've got. I'll go do something exciting and that'll get me out of a rut. I'll go be an FBI agent. And then to think that, you also kind of have some issues with depression and being down, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what
Yep.
kind of what the whole point here is, that it doesn't kind of matter how accomplished you are, you're gonna fight that demon no matter what.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think that it is surprising, and certainly when you put it in the context of recent events, some of the high profile suicides and things like that, I think people look at you and they say, "Wow, this guy's got everything going for him," or take an Anthony Bourdain or somebody like that. They've got everything going for him, and then all of a sudden something tragic happens, and people are like, "How the hell did that happen?"
Right.
But what you don't realize is there's a lot of stuff running in the background, and you just don't know another person's history. You don't know how they've been raised, and all the factors that can impact a person, and make it hard.
So what would you say then? So let's just talk through, because for me, I know that, when I'm getting into like a depressive period, oftentimes it'll be because something happens, like I'll lose a client, from the company that I'm running, or something will happen, and then you kind of get into this spiral of, okay, that happened, and then that's going to lead to this bad thing, and then that's going to lead to this other bad thing, and it's that kind of death spiral you get into. And I'm curious if that mirrors your experience, or if yours is a little bit different. How do you experience it, and have you recognized what the triggers are, and kind of, what is it that you experience that maybe people don't understand or they wouldn't appreciate if they didn't also kind of have the same affliction?
Yeah, I think I'm uncovering more and more what my triggers are. I suffered a pretty severe bout of post-traumatic stress after my time in Iraq, and the interesting thing was it took a number of years for that to uncork itself.
What do you mean on
And I,
cork? Like, in other words,
well,
just you recognizing that that's what it was?
yeah, me recognizing me. Well, I mean, the recognition was very, well, it was a very jarring experience, the recognition of it. But in retrospect, looking back and seeing kind of the things that sort of precipitated that episode, if you will,
Hmm.
like I didn't have a really good handle on that until I had some perspective on it, and I had some help with a counselor and that kind of thing. I didn't really understand what was going on with me until I had that break, and then got the help that I needed to get in that moment.
Hmm.
Then I sort of was able to look back on it and say, huh, this is pretty interesting. Post-war experience, a lot of pent-up anger, a lot of, I'm not going to say it wasn't apathy, because I was working very hard. I was deploying a lot.
Maybe cynicism.
It was a cynicism. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. It was a real deep cynical perspective on myself, on others, and it really kind of colored the way I was interacting with people.
I feel like that's pretty common. Just like a
Yeah,
general cynicism in situations. I mean, I guess it's pretty common no matter what, right? So we see cynicism just rampant in the military, and it doesn't matter what the rank is. And I think it's just because of the bureaucracy. But also, you see it in the corporate world a lot, where people just don't feel like they have buy-in to what they're doing, right? And
yeah,
I'm sure it's the same at the FBI. I'm sure it's the same at any of the other three-letter agencies. So I guess I wondered, before you went to Afghanistan and had whatever experience you had there that was kind of precipitated your post-traumatic stress. Did you ever have those kind of depressive episodes, or was this kind of, did it accompany the PTSD kind of out of nowhere?
I did. I just, if I really, if I'm really honest with myself, I think there were moments that I had some real sort of depressive periods in my life. Some of the periods where there might have been some loneliness and disconnection from people. Even inside of relationships, I've always been strangely introverted. Kind of, and you wouldn't expect that from somebody that does the work that I do or has done the things that I've done in my career. You wouldn't anticipate a person like that to be a very introverted person. But I've done all kinds of strange exercises to gauge these things, and I always end up a little bit on the fringe of the introverted side of the house.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is interesting. Yeah, but I think a lot of it has to do too with, for me, has been kind of a self-imposed isolation in many ways.
You mean before? This is before you joined the military, even, or?
Less before I joined the military. I think less before. I don't. Although I was, I think my wife would tell you I was pretty dark and brooding in high school. We went to high school together, so she would tell you I was pretty dark and brooding in high school.
Had the black eyeliner makeup and goth. Yeah.
Not quite. Not quite.
I don't
like
quite
that,
see you with that, but yeah.
Not quite that bad. I was pretty conservatively dressed, but
sure. No, I understand.
But yeah, just kind of had a little bit of the dark side always, I think.
Do you think that had to do with growing up with siblings, or is it? Can you think of? I mean, we talked, I guess the other day. You said that even though you had a good relationship with your dad, there were some times where, he didn't come to your baseball game, or I don't remember exactly what what those instances were. Can you think of maybe some of those things early on that would have kind of pushed you into what we would call kind of those darker places?
Yeah, I think, like I said, my dad is a great man, just a loving father. But, at that time, I think just in general, culturally speaking, it was all about success, and it was all about pushing your kids to achieve, at least in my circumstance. But he just worked so hard because he wanted to provide. He was a great provider. He wanted to provide for his family. He wanted us all to be very well educated, highly educated. He succeeded in that. But where I think there was a little bit of a disconnect was in, so he would say, I was always there to keep you from dashing your feet up against a rock. That was one of the quotes that he would always use for us. But the reality was he wasn't there in those times, and there were a lot of times where, as a young boy growing up, and obviously as a young man, there were a lot of times where he would step in vigorously, but it was too little too late. There was not I didn't have a very close relationship with my dad, and that kind of continued up until really just before he passed away, sadly.
So but over emotional, you mean in terms of like he was around, but he wasn't emotionally available, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's. Yeah. I think that's a pretty story common, of every father pre this generation, right? That was every father from the 60s, 70s, or I guess before the 90s or something. That was kind of the hallmark, is around but not emotionally available. That's how my dad was, and I'm sure that plays into all this, right? Because you learn your interactions, especially as a boy, right, as a man, from your male figures, right, and your father being the biggest one. And if they're not emotionally available, I know I've never seen my dad really cry. I guess here and there. And I know for me, I can't cry. Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that's like. And people get mad at me, and I'm like, I don't have that. You know what I mean? And it's not like I'm fighting it, but, my mom used to tell me this story where it was, she would get so frustrated at my father because he wasn't ticklish. And I thought, that's silly.
Mhm.
Like, who cares? It's just silly, whatever. But if you think, if from her perspective, she thought, well, this is just an emotionally locked down person, right? And I hear this. I'm not ticklish because it's not manly to be ticklish, right? Or some, there's so
Mhm.
much of this wrapped up into all this, right? Which is the
Mhm.
culture of manliness and Rambo, and can't crack a
Yeah.
smile.
Yeah,
But you're
it
supposed to
doesn't
be a
get
provider.
it doesn't get more manly than Marine infantry, followed shortly thereafter by the FBI.
Exactly right, and
hard,
but that's
it's
the
hard to
point,
get
is
more
that
manly than that.
exactly, and that's the whole point, is that it's like we grew up with this kind of false
Yeah,
idea of what
yeah,
manliness is like, and so
yeah,
we're fighting from an early age we fight it, and then we get so repressed, and it's so it adds to that stress, or whatever you want to call it, that kind of you having to act as if, right, you can't actually
yeah,
be yourself, and so that's just emotional, and I don't know, it's like cognitive overhead or something, and so
yeah.
it keeps you from really engaging with people, I guess.
Yes, I completely agree with that. Again, and this is my perspective, and this is my sort of realization over the course of the last 18 to 24 months, that's a sort of a trained kind of a habit. Not it is not We are not, as people, I don't believe we're designed inherently to be closed off from other people. I don't
Hmm.
think we're meant to be disconnected from people, and we're certainly not meant to isolate ourselves from other people.
But it's so easy to do,
Um,
right? Because once you just get into
it
that,
is very easy to
it's like
do.
addictive. It's like a
Yeah,
habit, right? And you just get into it, and you're
yeah,
like, okay, I know how to operate in this zone where I don't have to engage.
right.
And
It's a detachment, and it becomes that's exactly right. I think it does become a habit. But what that habit does is over time, it continues to harden, right? It hardens
mhm,
your emotions. It prevents you from feeling, even in a like a husband and wife kind of way, it prevents you from feeling the emotions that you really should be feeling.
right,
Like, you shouldn't be a robot. You shouldn't be disconnected from people that you love. That's not a normal kind of way to be. And that for me was a behavior that was kind of learned over time. And this isn't necessarily, it's not, I'm not blaming my parents for this. I'm just saying that's
it's just the
how I
culture.
was acculturated
Yeah,
over a
exactly.
period of years.
It's the
And
movies. I mean, I grew up
yeah,
watching, all these sniper movies with Tom Berenger, and
yeah,
they're all just tough guys, and
yeah, yeah,
Schwarzenegger and all this kind of stuff. And, his most emotional moment in Terminator is like, I know now why you cry, as he says with the stone face, right? It's kind of just like,
yeah,
well, if that's your cultural icon, Arnold Schwarzenegger, for anybody who grew up, any boy who grew up in the 80s, I don't think it's one thing, right? It's not like just your parents, it's not just the culture, it's kind of all the above, right? And so I think for tough guys, right? I mean, and I've been, what now? It's 15 years that I've been in the military, or still as a
hmm,
reservist, and you say, well, look, these are good things, so that we get into a tough situation and I can suck it up, and I'm not emotional and all this kind of stuff. And then some of the best leaders you meet, like, Mattis and all these kind of guys, who on the surface you say, okay, they're very cold, but really they're very warm people. They're very emotionally engaged, right? And they can,
hmm,
George Bush, right, as a president, Barack Obama as a president, they all had moments where they cried on television and were emotionally exposed, right, so to speak. And it's not a that wasn't a weakness. Again, it kind of I'm trying to figure out how does this fit into feeling down, and I think part of it is because we judge ourselves we judge ourselves for having these emotions, and so we fight it. So it's like a reinforcing cycle. So we say, no, I'm not that person, and then you have those feelings, and then you fight them, and it just makes you feel worse. And everybody's saying, like, that's okay, you can be like that, right? And you see other people and you're like, no, that's not me. And so you're kind of constantly fighting yourself, which puts your whole self-concept in doubt. I mean, does this sound familiar?
Yeah, yeah, it does. It definitely, again, certainly in my like recent context, it sounds very familiar, and it's a story that I've started to see sort of repeated over and over again. Is this detachment and this sort of disconnection from others? It's rooted in your childhood. It's rooted in your relationship, really, with your dad. At least, I think no, it just is. It just is the way it is. It's rooted, and this is why I think you see a lot of trauma around that with men today, in particular.
When you say,
And
yeah, go ahead, go deeper. What do you mean by you kind of, I mean, obviously it makes sense. And so do you think that's kind of part of this epidemic we're seeing especially with
yeah,
kind of middle-aged men?
yes, I absolutely do. I think that we are, just like you said, we go to, instead of having our dads model for us my dad was the most loving husband, the most devoted husband. He loved my mom. They were just like an incredible team, but yet all of his children, every single one of them, ended up divorced, in some cases more than once. That's a very strange thing to see happen when you have the image, like my family was intact up until my dad passed away. I came from an intact family. However, there was so much that wasn't said or wasn't taught to us as we were coming up, that you go to these other sources to find, well, Arnold Schwarzenegger, look at the guy. He's just huge and masculine and manly, and I need to be like that, or I need to be like Tom Berenger, or I need to be like Gunny Highway, or I need to be like one of these other men that's on screen. That clearly that's the man I need to try to emulate and be like. And that is, I think we're at kind of crisis levels with regard to that in our culture. I think there's a crisis of manhood. I think manhood, frankly, is and has been attacked for. Now we might start getting into a little bit of the politics of it, but I think it is and has been attacked for a very, very long time now. There are some pretty serious implications to that. What they are, I don't know, but I think the rash in some of these school shootings. I mean, you look at inner city, basically the complete collapse of inner city families and the violence in places like Chicago. A lot of it you can point directly back to fatherlessness, and you can point directly back to the lack of a strong male role model in a boy's life, and what that and the damaging impact that can have.
I guess I don't know enough of the history. I try to stay away from looking into the histories of these mass shooter types, just because I feel like that's kind of exactly what they want me to do. It sounds like what you're saying is that a lot of the folks who are doing these, I mean, it's almost 100% men, right? They're doing these school shootings and things like that. Is it the case that they don't have like dads in their life? Is that
I think I don't know the history of all of them, but I certainly heard anecdotally that most of these kids come from broken homes, come from trouble, like the one that was recently down, I think either in Florida or Texas, I can't remember. But that kid had been in and out of several different homes, and that's a broken family situation. And
yeah, I mean, I have my own theories on that whole thing about why you would do that. And I think there's certainly a piece of like what you're saying, which I agree with, which is not having good kind of healthy environment. But I think there's like there's a fame aspect to it. You want to be famous. There's also an ego thing, which is, you think you're bigger than you really are, and
Sure.
you can't
Yep.
prove it. So how am I going to do it? Well, here's a quick and easy way to do it. So I mean, I think it's a complicated thing. I guess so.
Where does that all derive from, though?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is cultural, right? We're such a celebrity-driven culture, right? Where celebrity is its own virtue, just by default of other people knowing it, and it doesn't matter why you're a celebrity, right? It doesn't. It's
Yeah.
not you being an accomplished, scientist or author or whatever. It's just the fact of being a celebrity. So I think the fact that that's kind of in the zeitgeist, that it's
Yeah.
something to look forward to, it's something to aspire to, I guess, to be a celebrity. I think that's a big piece of it. And so then when there are some people who, and I'm in that group too, where I want people to know who I am and the things I do and all this kind of thing.
Mhm.
And if you're the type of depressive person who there's this kind of weird person that I think there is, which is you're an egomaniac, but you're also super depressive. So you don't want to do anything, but you want to be known for how great you are. And I think that is the kind of psychological profile of some of these guys, where you think you're the best because whatever reasons you're delusional for some reason, but you're not going to actually put the effort in to going out there and proving it to the world in the way that the world has kind of set up, which is, you work hard, you go to school, or maybe you don't even go to school. You go and you create a business, or you go to school and then you create a business, or you go and you're a research scientist or a military leader, or, all these different kind of pathways that societally we say this is how you prove your worth, right? And so they don't want to put that effort in, or or maybe they don't have the cognitive capability to put that effort in. And so, they look around them and they see people being successful, or they see, their friend gets the girl and they didn't, or whatever it is, right? It's some kind of contest that they lost, or they continuously lose.
Mhm.
Even if they're like, I think in this case in Texas, the guy was like he was like a star football player, right?
Mm.
You could even be kind of doing well in your scenario, but in your head, you're not where you want to be. You don't have the celebrity or whatever it is, and you want to
Yeah.
make it that, you want to make it be that case. And so the fastest, easiest way to that, and especially if you're kind of suicidally depressive, which is a whole different ballgame, but if you kind of combine egomania with suicidal depression, well, there you go. You get yourself this. You get those people who try to get suicide by cop, and then you get the people who, and I think they're very much in the same group, right? So suicide by cop, and also I'm going to go shoot up a school. I feel like those are
Yeah.
very closely related in terms of kind of mentality, right? I think that's a big piece of it. So,
Yeah.
and again, it goes. Part of it is the stuff we're talking about, which is the kind of depression, and like where does it come from, and like how does it manifest itself, and kind of how does it start off. And I don't think anybody really has any right answers about that, but I think what we're trying to do here is just say, look, let's just start saying how many people are there or have it, and talk about our backgrounds and say it doesn't matter
Yeah.
how successful you get, you're still going to deal
No.
with it. And maybe there's some kind of common background that we can start. I mean, obviously, clinically, they know certain things are common, but from a kind of personal perspective, hearing it from a person, I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think certainly the more people talk about it, the better. Yeah, I certainly agree with that.
So, what about
A
your
couple of things.
siblings? You said they've been kind of rocky with relationships.
Yep.
Do you know if your siblings fight with the depression? Like, are
Yep.
they
Yep. Every one of them.
diagnosed? Say that again.
I don't know if they've been diagnosed, but certainly they've all shared with me that they've had some depression in their lives. I have no idea what they've done in terms of their medical treatment or anything like that. But yeah, I think we've all suffered from some form of depression, without a doubt. And, whether it's hereditary, whether it's as a result of the inputs in a person's life, and it's probably some combination thereof. But it is interesting to note all of my siblings are highly educated, highly successful people. It is interesting to note that all four of us suffer from some sort of depression and have suffered from some sort of depression at some point in our lives, or some sort of anxiety, or whatever the affliction might be. I mean, that obviously it's 100% in a family of 4 children. It's 100%. So,
do you know if your dad or your mom had the same? Do you know if they fought it, or do you have any idea?
I mean, I can only speculate,
right?
Because that was not a thing that people went and got diagnosed
Sure.
during that time. My mom definitely suffers from some kind of anxiety. I think my dad probably had some sort of depression just based on his life circumstances, and but again, here's a guy who came from absolutely nothing, very poor background, and he became incredibly successful over through a period in this country's history that it just defied all logic how he was able to achieve the success that he achieved. But he did it.
Common. I mean, it's such a common thing that really, depressive people end up very, very successful. And
some do.
No, it's true. I mean, certainly not everybody. But I think that, part of the impetus for starting all this is because, Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade and, previously Robin Williams, just the last, couple of years, the kind of hits have been coming. And obviously, there's different issues. Each of them dealt with it differently, right? But so many really successful people, fight with this. And I think part of why a lot of us become successful is because we're trying to fill that hole, whatever that is, with all of these kind of trappings of success. And it's not even like, the way I look at it is it's not even just superficial stuff. So buying the boat or the house or the cars or whatever,
no,
I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about having a family and spending time with, all these kind of, going running. I know for me, I used to be an ultra marathon runner. And so I'd spend hours running, and that didn't fill a hole. I've got 3 kids, and I still have the same problems. So it's not like you try to kind of find, okay, what am I looking for out there that's going to satisfy whatever this is that I'm trying to fill. And I'm coming to the conclusion that there is not a thing you can fill it with. You go back, and this is why it gets so frustrating, and you'll appreciate this, I think. But you talk to people, and they say, or even therapists, and they'll say, "Oh, you need to start exercising, or go do this, or these kind of." And they're not quick fixes necessarily. They might be fixes for some people who they're obese or something, and that's what it's contributing to their depression. But once you're now thin or whatever, well, you still have that thing in your head which is saying you're not enough, or you haven't filled it yet. So I think that for these kind of big celebrities, or even people who are successful on a small level, part of the driving factor is to fill that hole, right? And if you're bad enough, then you're going to work really hard to fill that hole, or kind of go off the deep end. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes, that definitely makes sense to me. And just speaking from personal experience, the hole was, it's just nothing is ever good enough. Nothing is ever good enough. You have to push harder. You have to do this. I used to do a lot of triathlon, and I did an Ironman. And it was so funny. I was dating a girl at the time. I was preparing for my Ironman. It was right before, and she's like, "Are you just going to do one of these, or are you going to keep going?" And I was like, I was dead on sure. I was like, "Yep, this is my thing. I'm going to do it, and I'm just going to keep doing it until the cows come home."
Right.
Sure enough, I've only done one Ironman in my life.
Because
And
it didn't fill it. Because it
some
didn't
people
fill it
would,
up. Yeah.
some people would look at that and they'd be like, "Dude, you finished the Ironman. That's a big deal."
Right.
Yes, yes, it is a big deal, and yes, it was a purely physical feat of accomplishment, But the sad part is, I finished the race and I finished it very, very well, under 12 hours for a first time Ironman. Literally, as I'm sitting in the tent recovering, I'm thinking, okay, well, what's next? What am I going to do next? Now, that's not a normal. To me, that's not. Well, maybe it is normal. Maybe that's what people are constantly doing. Those that have this insatiable urge to fill that hole that you're talking
I
about.
think that's it. Yeah.
It's like, what's next? And fortunately for me, and we don't have to get into the details of it, but fortunately for me, I've found for me what that answer is. Not everybody comes to that conclusion, and that's okay.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, I think part of what we're trying to do here is have whatever discussion is natural. And I mean, you and I disagree on religion issues, but I cannot ignore, and I will not. I can't. It would be ignorant for me to say that that's not useful for some people, or that it's not a valuable way to go. I mean, it's not me. Again, we've had this discussion, and I don't begrudge it, and I don't hold it against you or anything. I won't speak for you, but I think your relationship, both with your wife now, which I think has been a big piece of that, right? Or a big piece of why your religiosity is working so well. It's because you found community there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, yeah, exactly. I think it's a huge piece of it. I think it's fantastic. And so, the way I look at it is whatever works, right? Whatever can get you to where you're not suicidal, or where you're not just totally going down the hole. That's the goal, And anything beyond that's just kind of icing on the cake. So, so talk about that then. So what's your, like, kind of how I guess let's say what was that transition like? Because were you a hardcore atheist, and then something happened, and then you decided, hey, it's time to get religious, or has it kind of always been a running thread? Did you grow up with it? How did that all play out?
So I grew up Catholic, and we were we were relatively devout Catholics. I mean, I went to church every Sunday. I was a lector at the church. I was an altar boy. I did all that stuff growing up. I mean, we weren't super involved in church life outside of Sunday Mass. Mm-hmm. But then, then I kind of drifted away from it, and I didn't have much guidance in terms of my spiritual life, and I would go through these periods where I wouldn't go to church. I didn't care, and I was behaving recklessly and doing kind of silly things, and then I would kind of go through these periods where I would start to find my faith again, and I'd start to go to church again and that kind of thing. But really, where I really started seeing my faith in a different way was during the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and my role as an infantry company commander. And there were just some things that happened to me that I couldn't explain, and some things that happened to the Marines around me that I couldn't explain. And it was definitely, I personally felt a divine kind of a hand in it. And I just kind of put it in the back of my brain housing group, and it didn't really latch on for me at that time. I came back from Iraq. I got married shortly after. I got engaged right before I went to the war, and then I came back after 8 months, and we got married about 10 months after that. And I just didn't really have much of a compass in terms of my faith. I mean, we went to church every now and then, but it was never a big part of my life. It just for me, like the depression really set in, and the PTSD stuff, and the anxiety, and the anger, and all that stuff just really started to kind of go to work on me after I left the Marine Corps. Interestingly enough, and that there was a couple of factors involved in that. And this is the thing that I caution everybody that is leaving the military, leaving active service in the military, and going to another federal government job, or really any other job, is you have to be prepared that it's just not the same. It's
Right.
just not the same experience. I mean, you have to understand what you're getting yourself into, and you have to know that the leadership is going to be different. The culture of the organization is going to be different. I mean, there are so many other factors that are going to be different, and this is particularly important for combat veterans.
Sure.
That are coming fresh out of a war zone, and they're stepping into an entirely different environment, and it is jarring. It is a jarring experience.
Especially back, like, so if for, like, I'm Air Force. When we were heavy in Iraq and Afghanistan, oftentimes they would have us as, like, basically Army augmentees, or Marine augmentees. So for a lot of our our security forces, which are basically our cops, they'd go and be on infantry patrols, and they're not infantrymen, And then they do that for a year, and then they come back to a plush Air Force base with a bunch of people who wouldn't know the difference. And I mean and you're coming back to the world's the same as when you left, but you're different, right?
Yeah.
And so kind of, how do you square that? And it sounds like for you, a big saving grace is kind of getting back into the community of your Christianity, and kind of building that. And I think again,
it didn't start that way. It didn't start that way. The first thing I did was I got back into the Marines.
Right. Sure.
Strangely enough, I left the Marines. I had about 4 years of broken time, and then I came back in, and I thought that was going to kind of reconnect me, right? Because I had some unresolved, not issues is such a general word, but I had some unresolved feelings about my experience in Iraq. I had some unresolved feelings about what I could have done in my Marine career, and what I should have done, and all these things. And those things were unresolved, and I thought, well, I'll just go back into the reserves. It turned out to be a really good decision for a number of reasons, but it's not the right decision for everybody. But for me, it turned out to be a really good thing.
But
it did reconnect me in some ways.
Right, but it didn't solve your problem, right? It might have
helped
solve pieces.
Anything.
Right, exactly.
It didn't solve anything, but it definitely kind of helped soften that transition. And it took me a good 5 years to really kind of snap into civilian life. 5 years and a complete complete meltdown from post-traumatic stress that I didn't even know. It just came out of left field. It was the most debilitating thing I've ever dealt with in my life.
So what do you mean? So what's a meltdown look like for people who've never had one? I feel like, I think it's different. It's a little different for everybody, but there's probably commonalities there. So what's a meltdown look like for you?
For me, like, I was just kind of going, everything was normal, and then I got into a really stressful situation at work. Had a boss that was just terrible. Hated working for her. And there was some other stressors. Obviously I was having some relational stress with my then wife. I was getting ready to go into a very, very highly stressful graduate school program, and work was just busy, and we just we had a 2-year-old, and we had a baby on the way, and it was just the stress was immense. What I didn't realize, and I had some family stress too. I started seeing a counselor sort of on the side of that family stress. I mean, we saw the counselor together, but then I saw her separately, and it just started scratching the surface on some things on some emotions and things that I hadn't really understood or felt. And then all of a sudden, one night before I go to work, I wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm like, something doesn't feel right here. And I just remember feeling this weird feeling. I couldn't get back to sleep, until right before I had to go to work, and then so I didn't sleep very well that night. And then on the way into work, I just completely broke down, and just uncontrollable crying. I could not stop it. I tried several times on my way into work to stop it, but it was just, I couldn't really get a handle on it. And every time I would stop, it would just start again, and it was just like a flood of emotions coming out of me. And it went that way all the way until I got to the office. I got into the office, okay. And then I got upstairs, and it started again. So it's like I'm in my office building, and I'm having this this meltdown, this
breakdown, right?
Yeah, and so I had to get out of the office, and finally I was able to get home, and then that was just the start of it. Then the bad stuff started happening, and then I proceeded for a period of time to have nightmares and visions of my time in Iraq, and particularly I had a Marine who was very courageous Marine who unfortunately drowned trying to save some airmen, some Marines who had crashed their helicopter into a river, drowned trying to save them, and I had to basically identify him, and I just remember having to close his body bag and the whole thing, and for some reason that experience and that image has always just stuck so hard with me, even though I'd seen a lot of death, a lot of I'd seen just a lot of carnage on the battlefield, and caused a lot of it.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, all these, like you say, it's a different thing.
Yeah.
When it's your buddy,
Yeah, it was just an overwhelming kind of experience, and then so I start seeing his face over and over again, just night after night after night. I can't, I'm terrified to go to sleep because I know I'm gonna see him again, and it was very debilitating. And I was out of work for about a month, maybe a little more. I just couldn't bring myself to go into the office. But the thing that I did do, which was smart, was I started seeing, getting some help, and it was almost like on a daily basis. If I wasn't in the office, I was on the phone with my therapist, and so that was a pretty smart thing to do.
What was was it a woman that was your therapist?
Yeah.
What did she do that kind of, or what would she say or talk through that, help you cope, I guess, is the best way to say it?
Yeah, I mean, she gave me some techniques, to use to try to keep myself calm and that kind of thing. And I mean, we just talked through. It was a while ago now, so it's hard to remember exactly how she did what she did.
Kind
but
of the cognitive behavioral therapy.
Talk
therapy.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of talk therapy. It was a lot of kind of trying just to kind of rationalize how and why things happened the way they did, and so for whatever reason it worked okay. It wasn't the final. Well,
it's not a solution. It got you. It broke the cycle of trauma, so you could operate. So you could.
Yeah. It did get me stronger, and then I got through it, but it wasn't until very recently that it really. I'm not going to say you're never really cured from that kind of thing.
Sure.
The release that I had back in October, that program that I told you I went through.
And what was it? I mean, you can say it.
It's called Operation Restored Warrior,
Right.
and it's a faith-based program, and it's not, a lot of Christian ministries, they call them retreats, and they don't call it that. They call it a
Mm-hmm.
drop, because you're dropping yourself into combat basically, and so we
Emotional
don't.
combat.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not, the retreat for someone in the military has a negative connotation. And
Sure.
I went to a Christian retreat not long before, June of 2017, and it was good. It was really good. It's called The Crucible, and it really kind of opened my eyes for the first time. It really kind of uncapped a lot of the anger that I didn't realize I had stuffed down inside of me. It had
Mm-hmm.
uncapped for me, but it wasn't what I needed. And until I met some of the guys that are part of ORW, and until I participated in it, that was an absolutely profound experience for me. Absolutely, kind of has changed the trajectory of my life. It's changed so many things for me, how I think about work, how I think about my relationship with my wife, how I think about my relationship with my kids. I mean, it has fundamentally kind of rewired a lot of that stuff, because prior to it, it's been this constant need for, okay, I need to get out on this deployment. I need to go do this special team. I need to go do that special assignment. I need to do this. I need to,
Yeah, fill in the
go
hole with work,
duty. It's like filling the hole. Yeah, filling
with
the hole with,
activity.
yeah,
Just
and
keep it,
it's
just keep
not.
it moving, and if we
Yeah,
move fast enough, I mean, this is what I did with running. Is like if you just keep moving, you don't actually have to think about what's wrong with
right,
you, or focus
right,
on like
yeah,
how fucked up you are or whatever.
yeah. And but then when, I mean, for me, the introduction that I had to my faith in that drop zone was, for, like I told you before, for the first time in a really, really long time,
Hmm.
I felt truly at peace. I felt overjoyed, like a joy that, like, I was looking at. I remember, we were out in Colorado. I remember at the ranch that we were at, seeing myself, looking at myself in the mirror, and just the smile and the peaceful look on my face. I'm just getting the chills thinking about it right now. It was the most amazing feeling that I've had in such a very long time. So that's really what has done it for me, quote
How
unquote,
long
done it.
ago? How long? It was a year
That was
ago.
No, it was October of 2017 that I
Okay, so
went
not
through the.
quite a year. Yeah, not quite a year.
Yeah, not quite a year. Yeah, not quite a
So
year. It's been.
it's interesting because what we've been talking about. I mean, you're saying kind of some of the origins of the. I guess there's a couple of threads here. So the kind of origins of this kind of low-level depression, right, start in
uh
childhood, which is
Yeah.
this kind of. I think everybody has a search for, hey, what's true, what's out there. But if you don't have a kind of firm attachment or something to relationships, like I said, like with a father figure or mother figure or whatever, then you're trying to fill that hole too. And so there was always kind of like a little undercurrent, and then really hits you hard after the Iraq deployment. Have the kind
hmm
of have the I don't know. I guess you'd say like a breakdown or kind of crisis, I guess. But what's interesting to me is that what we hear so frequently about with, call the suicide hotline, call the, or, set up with the therapist for CBT or take antidepressants or, all these different things like that, right?
Yeah.
They're band-aids along the way, right? They're not
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm solving this problem. The therapist you saw after your breakdown, that was a band-aid, right? And so
Yeah.
I think when a
Yeah.
lot of people hear, oh yeah, you should really start therapy, it's some people see it as, well, that's the solution, but it's not. It's a band-aid. I mean, we've talked about this before. I've been in therapy since I was 8, when my parents got divorced. So,
Yeah.
I've always had, not always, but generally speaking, I've almost every year I've sat with a therapist or a counselor or something and had a conversation about, how I feel.
Mhm.
And I never found them effective because I never needed to be, I never got to the point where I needed to kind of be talked off the ledge. Now I've certainly had periods, and usually about every year I'll have about 2 months where I'll seriously consider how I'm going to go kill myself, in that period, right?
Mhm.
Now it's not necessarily I'm writing my notes and stuff like that, but it's kind of a typical thing that I've gotten used to. That's going to be a period of time that I'm going to go through, right? Um,
Yeah.
but I've never found in those periods, or even outside of those periods, like help from the suicide hotline. I haven't found help in therapists, but a lot of people do, and I think, like,
Yeah.
kind of like what you're saying. Obviously, you did. I mean, that's fantastic, and that's why those resources are there and useful. But what I'm interested in also is, okay, once we get kind of past that, right? Is how do you
Yeah.
take it to the next level for that kind of, okay, I'm creating this kind of more longer, this longer term contentment, or
Yeah.
this kind of more,
Yeah.
let's raise the level, just the
Yeah.
overall general steady state level. And, for you,
For
it
me,
sounds like getting more in touch with your faith,
yes,
that's been a big piece of that. And I think for a lot of
without a
people,
doubt.
that's a big piece of it too.
Yes,
Not
I
everybody.
agree.
In my case, like for me, I was very religious growing up. My dad's a preacher. He's an Anglican
Mhm.
priest. So I went to, it wasn't even just every weekend. It was during the week. Very involved at every event around the church. Um,
Mhm.
into high school, obviously I didn't do as much, or not obviously, but I just wasn't doing as much in high school. But I, stayed around, and then I got to when I went to college. It was, I was very into it the first year, and then, I'd always had doubts, but eventually I said, I just don't think this is for me, and I've never really gone back to it, and my goal is never to, shit on it, right? Because
Right.
I feel like everybody has their different path, and there's benefits, and there's, bad things and all this kind of stuff, and I feel like that's a completely separate argument. But like for me, it's religion is not going to get me where I need to be on long-term contentment, right? I don't feel. For you, it's fantastic. For my dad, it's fantastic. For, big swaths of the world, it works. But again, I go back to, what is it about these things that create that contentment, and is it sustainable, and how do we cultivate that after we've kind of triaged, with all the therapy and medicines and all the rest of that. And I
Yeah.
don't think there's one answer, right? I don't think there's a right answer for that. I think it's different for everybody. But I'd be curious to know what you thought about, what was it that you felt precipitated. I mean, you said you were talking to a kind of counselor, and that kind of
Mhm.
pried some stuff open. But what do you think that
Yeah.
kind of precipitated that breakdown period where you said, "Hey, I really got to do something about this," because, and I don't know if you had suicidal thoughts or whatever it was, but obviously you weren't functional. Just like I'm
No,
not,
I was.
just like I'm not planning.
Yeah.
I plan for about a month out of the year where I'm not functional. So
Right.
I laugh about it, but the reality is, there's that, or back to my question, which is, what do you think kind of pried that door open that kind of caused that? Because it sounds like it was almost beneficial, even though it sucked and it was really shitty. It kind of broke through a wall. Do you think it was
Yeah.
that counselor
Yeah.
that kind of helped pry that open?
I think. I mean, if I look at it in the context that I have now, if I look at it, I think it was by design,
Oh, you think it was like
divine intervention,
yeah,
or
some
call it
divine
whatever you
intervention
want.
or something? Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah,
no, I
I think it
understand.
was by design. I think it was. I didn't know that at the time, but in retrospect, looking at it objectively now, from the position that I'm in now, and it was such a hard thing to go through. There's just a host of reasons for it, and I haven't really gone back and looked at it. I mean, this is the first time I'm actually thinking about it in this way. but it's like you start to weave the story together, and you start to put the pieces together, and all of a sudden I arrive in this place where I am now, and it's like, well, wait a minute, the journey here has been a long and very, very difficult road. A lot of it, frankly, because of dumb decisions that I've made along the way. But all an education, all driven toward like an ultimate sort of revelation and understanding, right? And not that I am there yet, because I still have a long, long journey ahead of me. I think what precipitated me going to seek help, to get more directly at your question, was I was scared shitless. And I was terrified. I was terrified. I was gonna I was scared I was gonna lose my job. I was scared I was gonna lose my marriage, which ultimately ended up happening. I was scared I was gonna I was scared of myself, what I might do to my I was scared of all of
thing. It's just general, yeah. Just terrifying. Right. No, I understand. Yeah. I completely understand that.
It was like it was an absolute fear like I've never felt before or since, frankly. I mean, I won't say since. There's been not in that way. There's been I've had other fearful and anxious moments in my life. I don't think you can ever get away from that stuff. There's going to be stuff that's going to cause you to have fear and anxiety in life. There's no way to get around that. But feeling it in such stark terms, I haven't felt it quite as intensely or in such a sustained way. The intensity and the sustained sort of aspect of it were two things that were pretty unique to that circumstance. But I think, again, to answer your question directly, it was just abject fear. And like, oh my God, I gotta get some help. I can't live like this.
Yeah, it's just drowning in terror.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've had a couple of those. They haven't been so sustained, so I understand it to a degree. But, from my perspective, those periods are just absolutely like hopeless. I don't know if you felt, because it doesn't sound like you really felt a hopelessness. It was like you said, like a terror, like impending, like something you had to fight, right? And this gets back to my point that the way depression or anxiety or some mix of both kind of like present themselves or whatever, is very different. Because while yours presented itself as maybe a hopeless terror, mine just looks like void, or a kind of, it's a judgmental, you're never going to be anything, everybody thinks that you're the worst, and that kind of thing. But they both manifest themselves in a way it makes you totally useless. Just, you're a burden. You become, and which makes things worse, right? Because then you're like, well, shit, I'm wasting space here being sorry for myself or being terrified for myself, even though pieces of me know that everything's fine. Or maybe if they're not fine, I mean, obviously, to your point, is you had a very stressful life situation happening. I've had a stressful life situation happening for the past 25 years, or 30 years or whatever it is. And, I think for folks like us, that's just kind of, I don't know a whole lot of depressed people who don't, or at least this kind of depressive, that don't have a lot of like uncertainty around themselves, or chaos, right? And I think that's why so many people who are trying to help always talk about kind of relieving those things. So, that's why they say exercise. They say, get your life in order, clean up your room, get a better job, go to school, all these different things, right? Which they can kind of knock out. In theory, they can knock out some of these stressors. But I think what they really do is they just change what the stressor is, right? So whereas maybe it's lack of money in one case, In another case, it's you got plenty of money, but the only way you can do it is by working 90 hours a week at the law firm,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the solution is causing as many problems as the problem was to start with. Um,
Yeah.
that's why I say a lot of these solutions aren't really solutions, and I go back to this idea of what's the kind of for you, not you or anybody. I mean, what's for anybody? They're kind of what's your long-term contentment? Where is that long-term
Yeah.
contentment? And I don't have
Yeah.
an answer to that. I think everybody has to kind of figure out that for themselves.
No, I agree. I think it is one of these things that people need to come to on their own terms. What I will say is that from my seat where I'm sitting now, and I'm still very, very young in my faith and in my understanding. I will say that this experience, my understanding my faith in the way that I understand it now, and the way that I exercise it and engage it in my life, it is my solution.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it like I said, it's been absolutely transformational for me, and it's not comfortable. I'll say
Sure.
that much. It's not been easy. It's not been without a lot of pain, certainly for me, but also for my wife and for my kids and everything. It's not been without difficulty, and in fact, I think it's much more difficult in some ways. In some ways, it's a hell of a lot easier.
Hmm.
It's a heck of a lot easier when you realize that there is a blueprint for life and for living life, and following that blueprint can help bring your life in line and bring peace and happiness. And for the first time in my life, it's like I still worry about work, and I still worry about, am I doing a good job and that kind of thing, but I worry so much less about it now. I don't think about it nearly as much as I used to. It's not that I don't care about it, because it's important work, but the caring is even a little bit different. It's like
Hmm.
I care about it only so much as is necessary, and the rest of it is devoted to my wife and my kids. And for the first time in my life, I'm in that place, and I feel very confident and strong about it. And I own every day that goes by, and every day that I exercise my faith, and the way that I do it becomes stronger and stronger.
I think
So,
it's a good point you make, though, that it's not easy, and it's not
no,
because nobody's promising it's going to be easy, right? And I think that's maybe a better point than you even realize, or even both of us realize when you make it. But it's this, not that we have the answers here, but I
no,
think what we're pointing to is that to get to some kind of contentment doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna have an easy time. Just because things suck and you feel bad about yourself doesn't mean that in the future things aren't gonna also be tough. It just means that you're not gonna live in that dark place or that
right,
kind of lost space where you're rudderless or you just feel like it's hopeless, right?
yeah,
You're still gonna struggle with it, and there's gonna be stuff that you're gonna fight. But like we were talking about before, you raise the water level so that you never dip down, below a certain kind of emotional state or kind of content state. I guess is, and I think that's a journey. Some people don't ever get
mhm,
there. I think it's fantastic that you're there or coming close to it at least, or feel like you're on the right track. And I think that, I,
yeah,
and I've told you before, yeah, I envy that. I think
mhm,
that's fantastic, and I'd love to get to that space. I'm trying to figure out what my kind of pathway is to that, and I
mhm,
think that's what a lot of people are doing, and I think it's important to just say, hey, look, it's not easy. It's not gonna be easy, and I think you made a great point there that it's still really tough. And
yeah,
so it doesn't matter how accomplished you are or how much you got or whatever it is. and that you broke through and you had a huge success in breaking through like a crisis. I mean, a lot of people will succumb to that, right? So, I mean, I think that's something to be. My guess is you haven't celebrated that even. Maybe you have through some of your other groups, but celebrating kind of. I always do that. So whenever I have kind of a period where I just feel like shit and want to die and jump off the Bay Bridge or whatever it is.
Don't do that. I don't recommend it.
Of course, yeah. But you get through that and you have a little mini celebration. You say, "Holy shit, I made it through!" Kind of like firefight, or you get a bunch of inbound mortars or whatever. You're like, "All right, made it through that one."
Yeah.
That type of thing. I'm sure you have plenty of friends who have alive days. If you know what I'm talking about, right? Like you get blown up or something, and
yeah, oh yeah,
it's like it's your alive day.
Yep.
So yeah, so the little celebrations, I guess, where you can. I'll go ahead and start, wrapping it up because it's getting late. But look, I really appreciate you talking through this stuff. I mean, I always want to do this anyway, but I think this is a good medium. And yeah, we'll see where it goes. I think everything you said was crazy valuable for pretty much anybody out there.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
If it helps, I've done my purpose. If it helps one person, I will be happy with that.
Well, we'll see. Hopefully, I get some good feedback and kind of see what happens. So, well, it's beautiful. Thanks for talking to me, and yeah, we'll catch up next couple days.
All right.
Thanks, brother.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Talk to you later.
All right. Bye. Yep. Good night.